Language and composition students, Mr. Francavilla here for part 2 of analyzing images. This is lesson 32. All right, so just to finish up about the new terms. In addition to color, we have line. All right, so it is a little bit, you might think, like continuation, but when a specific line is already apparent and our eye isn't just putting it together, that's a different idea than continuation. So someone who creates images can use horizontal, vertical, wavy, and diagonal lines to convey certain emotions and ideas. So horizontal is like the ground, stable, all right? Unless you live in an earthquake zone. Okay, calm, equilibrium. So we keep that in mind. Someone who's creating advertisements, you know that they have these things in mind. Vertical lines symbolize movement. That one's a little harder to explain, but I mean, maybe just the opposite of what the stability of the horizontal. Movement for vertical. Wavy, softness, grace, flow, and even change, right? Things aren't staying the same. Diagonal. Remember this when we analyzed the Dr. Seuss cartoons from World War II. Diagonal equals stress, but I don't think it always has to be a bad stress. It can just mean that something is dynamic, perhaps, and so on. So diagonal means stress, oftentimes. Now, finally, our minds want to make sense of pictures, which we saw that with continuation. Our minds create images to make sense of things. And they do it with the small components in an image, but the whole image itself. So our mind will want to complete, and so not just making sense of a part of a picture, but our mind can create the whole picture. Like you see those visuals that can be taken in at least 2 different ways, however you look at it. So your mind is working on making sense of an image, and so it works one way to form it or another way. Okay, so that's what's going on in our mind. So it's just another technique that we want to be aware of. Now, I'm going to have an actual visual that I want to show you. This isn't the main one. So, back in early 2009, at the end of President George W. Bush's terms in office, someone made this cartoon up, and it ties in with the next picture we're going to see. So George Bush is speaking to a park ranger, and he's saying, "I was just driving on my way to Texas." And he says, "No." The answer is no. The park ranger says, "If you could just help me lift something." I said, "No, it won't take a minute." And now we see he's in front of Mount Rushmore, and the park ranger is adamantly saying no. And what is it that George W. Bush wants? He wants to have his image in stone up with the other famous presidents that are on Mount Rushmore. So that is humorous. He thinks he's as impressive and important as those past presidents. Someone else thought that too, or tried to create that message. And let's look at this argument that's inherent in this next visual. Oops, that's one way. I guess it's on here further down. Okay. Okay. So it might be a little difficult for you to see, but what we have here is George W. Bush, when he was president, supposedly addressing a crowd, speaking. And so he's speaking. That's our topic. What is the thesis statement? Well, he's speaking, and he looks very authoritative. He's got his hand up in a sort of a authoritative gesture, and he is placed here. So what are all of the so what is the message? That he is a worthy president on the par of presidents of the greatest presidents of the past. That could be a message. Also that he is an effective speaker. So we do have at least two arguments that are inherent in this picture. But what are the techniques that are working to create that claim, those claims? This one, with a microphone pointing right at his mouth, it's called continuation. We're creating a line. We're linking two things. Our mind is anyway, because of the direction this is pointing and direction he's pointing. So we link those and say, public speaker, good public speaker, with that in mind too, good public speaker. So it's through the technique of continuation. Now, we also have the idea of continuation again, because we have a line of presidents right here, and then we have his face. It isn't exactly in line, but and it's bigger too, more closer. So this is actually our focal point, right? But it is in somewhat of a line with these heads of the presidents. So our mind says, oh, he belongs in that group. So it's really proximity, similarity, and continuation. All are interplaying here to make us accept the idea, well, I guess he belongs there with those presidents. We have figure ground contrast because he is very bright shirt color here of white, and also he had the blue tie in the original and very dark black. So he is dominating by size and by coloration and shading. So he is our focal point because of the figure ground contrast, making him more vivid. And what else do we have? Well, yes, these heads are in a line and they're all, heads, so they're all similar that they're all heads, but we have deep set eyes, right? And he has other qualities which are making us believe that he is similar to these other presidents. Similarity, okay, is making us group them together, not just the main images, but the details. And what else do we have here? We do have, the notes on this say, we have continuation here because George Washington is looking downward at him. That doesn't mean downward negatively here, but there is continuation. He is perhaps like the heir of George Washington. There's continuation. So we link them together and we make some assumptions based upon their linking that he is on the par with George W. with George. Oh, they're both George W's, aren't they? Okay, so that's interesting too. Yes, so those are some of the techniques that are working together. Let's see what time I have left. Good, we have more time. So I do want to show you an essay that was written. And let's see where it is. Okay. This is very difficult to see, and I don't have a good image right now of it, but if we flipped it 90 degrees or so, it's a vulture looking downward to its left towards a hunched small child on a field, a stubble field, and the small child has some sort of necklace. This is the head of the child, some sort of necklace around his or her neck. We have this beak of this vulture pointing that way. It's kind of sharp. This vulture is above the child. And so we have a lot of strategic placement of the two objects, right? So we're going to look at an essay on that. So a certain student, Ryan Pollock, used the terms that we were just going over to analyze that photo, and I'm just going to read it to you. When I first laid eyes on Kevin Carter's photograph of the vulture and the starving Sudanese child, I was immediately hit by several strong reactions. The photograph first caused me to experience shock, curiosity, sadness. Right? So his cause-effect photographed these emotions. However, the strongest was guilt. I had never seen the picture before, only vaguely knew what the subject matter was. I knew little or nothing about the situation, who had taken it, why, but I felt guilty. So he was strongly affected by the photo. But why did he feel that way, he expresses here. And he's going to go into the details of the photographer's techniques that made him feel that way. So at first he talks about, I think, focal point. The child was the first part of the picture I saw, with her head bowed as if in acknowledgement of Sudan's terrible economic and political situation. The child serves as a starting point, the idea of focal point, at which the viewer can begin to experience more feelings about the picture. By placing her so near the center, Carter decides to make the starving child one of the main focal points of this picture, immediately emphasizing the severity of Sudan's food crisis. So look at the choice of this focal point has this message attached to it. This focal point has this effect and purpose. It's still cause, effect, purpose, just like we were studying with techniques before. And how so? How so? By personifying this political, sociological situation through the image of the child. So how do techniques work? We have to explain that too. Right? The child, with her skinny legs and distended belly, instantly produces a shocking and sympathetic reaction. See, how do techniques work? Through these details too, right? We can't just use the terminology focal point. We have to go into the details. Let's see what kind of time we have. In any case, the sadness and despair I felt were heightened even more by the placement of the two figures, the child and the vulture, against the background. So we had focal point, now we have figure, ground. Almost the entire background is taken up by muddy-hued greens and browns, so he's talking about the background, providing a stark contrast that causes the dark brown figures of the vulture and the child to stand out. By bringing his two main subjects to the forefront of the image, the bird and the child, Carter creates a sense of immediacy that leaves no trace of doubt. So what is the figure-ground contrast doing? Create what effect? That effect. Carter chose to narrow his image to include only the child and the vulture, leaving out any distracting element and using the muted background to his advantage. So we have more detail about the background, in addition to the colors. And oftentimes what we write about with technique choice is what isn't used. So the road not taken, sometimes we call it. And he's not allowing anything else in the picture. That is a technique. Since the two figures stand out so prominently, my emotions of shock and guilt about the image and the situation quickly rose to the forefront of my own mind. So more effects. In another instance, Carter's choice of emphasizing contrasts, whether incidental or not, so sometimes they do just happen, in the image also drew my eye to different parts of the photograph. First, to the form of the white necklace around the child's dark brown neck, so we're getting to shapes and colors. While white traditionally symbolizes relief or peace, the child's bowed head and neck, yielding to the gravity of her situation while her predator's head remains erect and alert, only highlights the vulture's arrogance. So we have color, and we also have shape, right? So more like horizontal versus vertical right there is what he's talking about. So it's a little bit like line too. The bird seems almost to be celebrating a victory with its white prominent beak pointing directly